All right, so a little bit about me. I'm the senior pastor here at Unity. I've been here since 2018, moved from a large Presbyterian church in Tampa and grew up in the Seattle area. So I've kind of been all over the place. I graduated with my doctorate from Union Presbyterian Seminary in 2024, last year. And the last year of that was the project for this. So here are the stats, and yeah, just continue to share. Perfect. So over the course of a year, I presented a 7-question survey to all 166 presbyteries of the PCUSA. And I directed the survey to the general presbyter or the presbytery leader of that survey. And I received a response of 133 presbyteries, which would make up 80% of all of our presbyteries. So the way I would do this is I would send an email, and then I would wait for a while. And then if I didn't hear a response, I'd send another email. And then if I still didn't hear a response, for a weekend in January, I just rented a little house up in Blowing Rock. And I just made phone calls all weekend. I just called the general presbyter saying, I've got a survey for you. Will you please, respond to it? And so eventually I got to 80%. I said, all right, that's good. That's enough. I'm going home now. So this is a really good picture, I think, of our denomination. Now, the one thing I was hearing over and over again was particularly resignation. So several of the questions allowed for a general presbyter to share the biggest obstacle that they had to church planting, as well as best practices. And unfortunately, one dominant theme that emerged time and time again was just the theme of resignation. Many PCUSA presbyteries were kind of plagued by a vision of just general hopelessness. So here are a couple of examples. These are quotes directly from the general presbyters, and I've chosen to keep them all anonymous. So one quote said, "Our existing churches are small and many are unsustainable. We are in a season of hospice and death, not the new life of planting churches." I mean, that one just about broke my heart when I read that comment. And I thought to myself, well, all churches go through seasons. All presbyteries go through seasons. It makes me wonder, what season of life is your church in right now as you come to this place? But this general presbyter indicated that when they looked around their presbytery, they were in a season of hospice and death. And therefore, they weren't interested or capable in planting something new. Really, their sole focus, as I dug into their responses, was just walking with churches as they concluded their ministry. They said that takes all of our time right now, because we want to do that well. We want to be with churches as they close, but that was 100% of their focus in that presbytery. Another general presbyter said the biggest challenge has been the focus on propping up declining ministries as opposed to starting new ones. I mean, over and over again, I heard from general presbyters saying, we have no time. We have no time. And the time that we have is spent walking with these churches that need us because they're declining. They're in crisis mode. And so if most of the presbytery's attention was focused on struggling churches and helping them be there for just a little bit longer, it made me wonder, okay, do they have any time to dream? Any time to dream about the future, about what may be for their churches and for their presbytery. So really my central question is, how can we overcome the status quo of resignation and really ignite the imagination of your church, of your presbytery, and hopefully eventually the denomination? And my answer to that question is to reclaim the Christian hope. Now, this was a doctoral project, so I needed to base it in theology. They would fail me if I didn't. And so I said, well, I'm basing my research on a theology of hope. So briefly, here's what that means. Theology of hope. What is hope? Well, first I look at the scriptures, and Paul has such a good definition. He says, may the God of hope fill you with all joy and peace as you trust in him, so that you may overflow with hope by the power of the Holy Spirit. Now, Paul could have referred to God as anything, the God of love, the God of grace, and both of those things would have been true and accurate. But Paul referred to God as the God of hope. And I think that's the case because hope is an essential characteristic to the nature of God. Hope must be present, therefore, in any conversation we have about the future work of the church. Well, so still, how do we define hope if it is essential to God? Here are some possibilities. Aristotle said hope is a waking dream. Now, what he meant by that is he believed that hope was a dream for the future. I think when we hope for things, it's future oriented, right? It makes me wonder, do you have a dream for the future of the church? Something you yearn for deep inside of you? I bet you do. But a dream is not yet attained, and nor is it rooted in present reality. So it's future oriented. We're looking towards the future. And yet, to Aristotle, it is a waking dream, which means it's not completely confined to the future. There must be something in the present that leads us to the belief that the dream will actually come true, that the dream of the future is somehow breaking into the reality of the present. So do we see signs of the future church even in our midst right now? Or you've got favorite of mine, Kierkegaard. And Kierkegaard, the Danish theologian, said hope is a passion for what is possible. So in his view, the Christian hope, it not only recognizes future possibilities, but is passionate about seeing them become reality. Now, I know everyone in this room today or on the Zoom call, we're passionate about seeing the church grow. We're passionate about seeing the church thrive. We have a passion for what is possible. Now, all of these definitions are good, but I think I spent the most time working with theologian Jürgen Moltmann, who passed away just about a year ago. Here's what he said. He said, from first to last, and not merely an epilogue, Christianity is eschatology, the study of the last things, is hope, forward-looking and forward-moving, and therefore also revolutionizing and transforming the present. He goes on to say, hope is nothing else than the expectation of those things which faith has believed to have been truly promised by God. So when all is said and done, hope is squarely in the center of what it means to be a Christian. I believe that the God of hope confidently guides the church into an unknown future. None of us can predict the future of the church. And for many of us, that fills us with a sense of anxiety, right? Considering what may happen in the future quickly conjures up images of in our mind of all that could go wrong. But it need not be so for the Christian, because Christianity is hope. So why we begin with this theological grounding is with the recognition that the future is not simply a continuation of what has been. The future is about what may be. And with God, future possibilities are all full of good news. So I hope that you will keep yourself rooted in the Christian hope as we explore some of the findings from my survey, which at first blush may seem less than hopeful. But I wanted to not just do discussion all at the end, I wanted to pause throughout our time together. And so I had a couple of questions for you at this point in our presentation. The first is that which definition of hope resonated most with you? And if you're on Zoom, we've minimized you so we can't see you, but I want you in the discussion, so feel free to just holler out if you want to say something. But which definition of hope resonated most with you? I'll get them back on the screen so that you can see them.
Forward-looking, forward-moving for me.
Yeah. Just that future-oriented thought. Yeah.
A passion for what's possible.
Why'd you like that one?
You know, I think if you are looking forward and looking at all the things that can go wrong, you're setting yourself up for all the things that can go wrong. So I like to look forward with what we can accomplish. I'd rather try something and fail than not try something.
Absolutely.
But I like that too, as far as the passion part. Because I mean, you can have, oh, you know, future vision, but if there isn't energy and movement toward that, then you're not realizing it.
Mhm. Yeah, we often think of hoping as just wishing for something, and it's not. It is, you need to be passionate about seeing that become a reality. It's not
Yeah.
just wishing for a strong church in the future.
Mhm.
The interesting thing to me, and also the scary part, is that the last phrase of the Moltmann quote. Because revolutionizing and transforming the present
Yep.
is scary for most.
And I think one of the things that we have to understand is that there are requirements that are attached to hope.
Mm,
And that's where you get into the revolutionizing and the transforming, because there are requirements. And I think in churches today, and especially smaller churches, we don't want to look at the true requirements.
Yeah.
To be a church.
mhm, mhm. Right, it's not about maintaining and just keeping the status
Nope.
quo. There has to be substantive changes to reach something new, which is hard.
Yep.
That's hard.
I kind of think I like the Romans quote a lot because I think the Holy Spirit, his publicist doesn't do a good job.
We often ignore the Holy Spirit to our detriment.
You know, the Holy Spirit's in us and that, you know, that's powerful.
Yeah.
You know, if you'll embrace it,
Mhm.
it's
Mhm.
real easy to ignore or forget
Right.
about.
Right.
But if you embrace it, it just makes things possible.
Amen.
Mhm.
All right, I've got a second question for you too. Where do you see signs of hope in our presbytery? So this is reigniting the imagination of our presbytery. So I'm going to have some specific questions for us. So where do you see signs of hope? Right here in the presbytery, Western North Carolina.
Artisan church.
I'll sit right next to you. I'm celebrating a 4-year anniversary where 4 years ago, a church did not exist in that same way. That is very hopeful.
Shows Ford Presbyterian Church where we joined when we moved to this area. And to see the things that have happened, you know, in the time that we've been here is such a blessing.
Yeah.
By the way, I chose that scripture when I led a Presbyterian pilgrimage weekend, the one that you had.
Did you really?
Yes.
Love that. Love that. Good. Any other signs of hope?
I
Doug.
don't usually go to the Presbyterian meetings. It doesn't happen every quarter.
Oh,
But
wow.
I went to this last one. Sorry. I go often.
I saw you.
I go often. And I was, and sometimes that gives you good perspective when you're not there all the time, right? But oh my goodness, I was just so struck by the diversity and the scope of so many good areas of work. And the one that comes to mind easiest is the response and the 1-year outcome so far to Helene.
Wow. Yes. Yes.
It was devastating.
Mm.
And out of that has come, you know, it's been pretty amazing just to hear and see some of the stories. Yeah.
I was just doing our new elder training, and when we talk about being Presbyterian and being connectional, I lift up Helene as an example. I said, this is when this works at its best. And it really is. It's a beautiful example. Yeah.
Another sign of hope to me is when the Presbytery received House of Mercy as a new worshiping community. This is a congregation that was started by a pastor who is now a part of our presbytery. And their ministry is mainly, not entirely, but mainly to formerly incarcerated people. And there's a lot of good energy in that congregation.
Where is that one?
Where?
West Asheville,
Yeah, West Asheville.
House of Mercy.
Yeah.
Yeah, you need to check that one out.
do.
It's very interesting,
Yeah.
wonderful.
Yeah, and I was at the 1-year anniversary of Helene gathered at Black Mountain Pres.
Yeah.
That was just, I mean, there was not an empty seat
Right.
in the gathering, and so that was kind of beautiful.
That is beautiful.
And it's still going on.
Oh,
You
yeah.
know, the hope did not stop with what went on there.
Right.
It is really, it's central to who White Mountain especially is, and
Mhm.
Swannanoa,
Oh,
who
yeah,
we worry
sure.
for like crazy.
Mhm.
But everybody now figures, okay, we did this, so we can do this. And
Mm.
people coming from all over. So that hope is not just held in us, it's held in the people who come.
Right.
Where do you see signs of resignation? Now, this could be in your church, in your presbytery, in the denomination, however you want to answer it.
Well, and I know as far as First Pres Gastonia, having only been a member there for 3 years, but it's the congregation or the role is somewhat larger than Unity. But obviously, as far as in the past, it had been a much larger church.
Mm.
And we have a lot of folks that have been there for decades. And, you know, there will still be some folks that will lament,
Mhm.
you know, oh, we used to have, you know, somebody in Sunday school with youth program and so, you know, it's not like everybody's given up hope, but, of that aspect of resignation of, you know, we aren't what we used to be.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think resignation can happen so easily when we compare. And when you compare to the glory days, whenever that is for a church, it's
Yeah.
hard to look at the future because you're looking behind you.
Right.
Mhm.
But we are in the middle of a curiosity and courage effort
Mm.
as far as to, and this is very extensive of, we have done 40 days of prayer. We did a online survey. We are doing listening groups. And this is with a consultant, but as far as to look at where do we as a church want to go? What is our vision? What is our mission? And I have felt a lot of energy
Mm.
from that. So, you know, it's not the resignation, but it is, you know, working to counteract that.
Love that.
Mhm.
I love that. I wrote that down. Curiosity and courage.
Yeah.
That's great.
So I relate to why did Jesus come? You had Pharisees and Sadducees that were very loyal to God, to their rules, to their laws. And Jesus came as a change agent, specifically as a change agent,
Yeah.
because what they were holding on to was inhibiting them from moving forward.
Mm.
I get very worried that what we hold on to prohibits us
Mm.
and inhibits us from moving forward. And it's not just Presbyterians.
Yeah.
This is mainline denominational churches of all types.
Yeah. Is the mouse still gone? Because I'm curious if you can click on the chat. I know we had, but yeah, if the mouse is gone, don't even worry about it. That's okay.
You know, what I hear in resignation is this sort of feeling of stuckness.
Mhm. Mhm.
Uh,
That's great. I'm just gonna the presentation.
Just having lived a certain way in a congregation for a few zillion years, people don't have any way of imagining a different way of doing church, which is not criticism.
Mhm.
It's that our familiarity is all we know, but it's no longer in sync with where people are in the culture, you might say.
Mhm.
I was up in Northern Virginia a week ago and went with our daughter to a 16-year-old Anglican church. It was packed,
Mm.
350 people, no room in the inn, and they were all 40 years old.
How about that?
And I thought, wow, I mean, what a sign of hope.
Mm.
But they weren't stuck because they were all learning new from
Right.
the ground.
Right.
Those of us who've been doing it a different way forever have a different challenge.
Yes. Janine, can you read some of those comments for us?
Yeah, Leslie says passion for what is possible, supported by revolutionizing and transforming the present.
I love that.
I forget who that was.
Ghana is the.
Dawn, okay. I think our hope must be grounded in faith that the Holy Spirit can accomplish through us whatever we cannot accomplish ourselves.
Amen.
Wanda Neely, the way our presbytery finds ways to enable instead of focusing on why something can't be done.
Mm.
That's hope. Leslie says new churches and excited established churches. And then Donna said, as a member of First Pres Asheville, I see hope in all the young families and children we're welcoming weekly. However, the growth has been intentionally cultivated.
That's great. All right, if you can get back to sharing, I think you got to click on that again. Perfect. Okay, very good. So we'll have several moments throughout today to just pause and discuss what we've just learned. But let's get into some of the initial findings, some of the data. So this was my first question. How many new worshiping communities or new churches have been formed in your presbytery within the past 5 years? So what I learned was that 44%, that's that green line up there, 44% started 0 new churches or new worshiping communities in the past 5 years. Which again, I don't know what I expected. I guess I expected it to maybe be a third or a quarter of our presbyteries, but close to half was pretty staggering to me and pretty surprising. I also learned that 25% of presbyteries started 1 new worshiping community in the past 5 years. So when you take that together, 69% of our presbyteries started 0 or 1 new church in the past 5 years. So about 70% of our presbyteries haven't done a lot on this front of planting new churches, starting new things to counteract some of the church closures that we've been having. Now, there was some good news in that. That bottom line, the purple, that's 9%. 9% of our presbyteries started 5 or more new worshiping communities in the past 5 years. And 7% started 4 in the past 5 years. So even though the majority of our presbyteries are not engaged in planting new worshiping communities, we can learn from a couple that are doing this consistently and are doing this well. Let's go to the second question. I also wanted to know how many churches have closed in your presbytery in the last 5 years. So we're talking about starting new churches, and also in that same presbytery, how many have closed in the same time frame. So what I learned was that 21% of presbyteries, so 1 in 5, closed 5 or more churches in the past 5 years. That's that purple line at the bottom. 13% closed 4 churches in the last 5 years, and 21% closed 3 churches in the past 5 years. So when you take that together, 55% of our presbyteries, so a little over half, have closed 3 or more churches in the past 5 years. What I think this shows us is that the need for church planting and the need for church growth in existing churches, it's great. It's a great need because of the rapid rate of church closures. Now, our denomination and their statistics kind of back up what we're seeing on a local level. So, I interviewed individual presbyteries, but then I also looked at the data that comes from our denomination each year to say, is that telling the same story? And it really is. So what I learned is that our denomination has actually had a net loss of members every year since its founding in 1983. So in 1983, you had the northern branch and the southern branch of Presbyterians that joined together and became the PCUSA. But each year since then, there's been a net loss of members. So the PCUSA since 2016 has averaged about 56,000 members each year in a net loss. Now, there's probably a number of reasons for that, or theories of what was happening around that time period. I know there was a lot of contentious votes going on around that time and a lot happening in the denomination. But really, for the last almost 10 years, it's been 56,000 per year. So if that decline in membership continued at the exact same rate, we would not have a denomination in 2043. It would be 18 years from now. Now, obviously, I don't believe that's going to happen. There are a lot of vibrant Presbyterian churches, and so I do believe that that rate is going to level out. And eventually, hopefully, it will, instead of a decline in membership, it will grow. We'll have new members coming into the Presbyterian Church. But we're in a season right now of pretty significant and rapid decline in our denomination. And I think that's reflected by the data we saw at our presbyteries and on their level. This next graph was shared by Stan. Thank you, Stan. I stole it from you because I thought that was a very helpful one.
I stole from a fellow in Pittsburgh.
Oh,
We got it from somebody else.
This is data done by Ryan Burge, who puts out a lot of good data on church denominations. But this shows historically what's been happening since the 1970s. Of particular interest probably to us is the main line, since that is a PCUSA. You can see we had about a 30% kind of, for lack of a better term, market share at that time in the 1970s. And that steady decline has, just continued through 2020 to be what it is today. Conversely, and it's a little, you can't quite see it, but the nuns that's that kind of pinkish red line. Unfortunately, that's the line that is going in the opposite direction. That's the people who say, when you say, what religion are you? They just click none. No faith. So that has very much increased. At the same time, the mainline denomination has decreased.
Are they churchgoers or are they have no faith at all?
No faith. The nuns are
So
no
they don't
faith.
go to church at all.
That's my understanding.
That's right.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's interesting. I would, I think there needs to be a lot of research into your question that you just asked. I've got 3 kids and, 2 of them have gone through confirmation and would identify as Christian. My third, doesn't identify as anything, has avoided confirmation. He goes to church more than the other 2.
How about that?
So I don't
Really
I don't
interesting.
think it's very, there needs to be more research.
And that's what I'm hearing and finding is I attach to no religion, but I have faith and I want to find a worshiping community that I'm comfortable with.
Which could be different than spiritual, but not religious. You start to
And blurs a little bit.
refine the, as you're saying,
Yeah.
there are these subcategories in that big category there.
Yeah, nuns does not mean no faith. It means de-churched.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
I just think there's a continuum of diversity in that, in what we're calling the nuns, that I think we need more labels to sort of fill it out a little bit.
What I also found interesting was you had those other kind of main denominations with Catholicism, evangelical. They've experienced recently some decline, but it's not the same as the main line. And so, I don't think comparison is helpful other than to ask probing questions about ourselves to say, well, okay, why has the main line struggled so much? Why has our denomination struggled so much? Because when we can look at those, those questions with accuracy and just being honest, I think that's how you grow and can propose some solutions, hopefully. So I think this is a good time to pause for more discussion. Are you surprised by the rate of closures in the PCUSA? Why or why not?
Could I get you to go back one slide?
Yes.
Because the interesting demarcation point to me is you look at that year 2000 and what happened the next year, 2001. Is it scary to anyone else that is when the pickup in the nuns
Hmm,
started.
that is an interesting point.
Yeah,
Hmm,
and you would think, now, it looks like we had mainline had an uptick about that time, but very slight.
mhm,
But after that point, after we got past the 2001 problems, we continue to have a big slide down. I mean, look, that's a huge slide,
hmm.
and the nuns just keep going up and up from that point on. So there was what was the fallout of 9/11 here?
It's a great question. I also want to point out, I think it's very interesting. I mean, the nuns have been increasing dramatically up until the last year or so.
Yep.
And there's been some data that has been put out going, are we seeing a change here? Are we seeing a shift here where that rise is not going to be so dramatic anymore? You can see it's gone down just a tad. Possible sign of hope.
Well, not to be a downer, but
I said possible.
but the question is, I mean, the big thing to me is the new, and it's not really that new, Christian nationalist kind of emphasis. Is that where the growth really is? And yet we say, wait a second, that's not Christianity.
That's a good
And
question.
so, you know, is the hope, sorry, don't want to hit you now, but is the hope that we see in some upticks not being what we would call Christianity?
Because I see what you're saying, not to equate that fully with evangelical, but they are the ones who have in that same amount of time gone up while the nuns have gone down. So it's not the main lines growing, it is these other branches.
Right.
I have a friend who's 35, and she has witnessed an incredible number of people in her peer group that have gone from either being a nun. She describes it as a Christian conversion experience. Like the majority of the people in her peer group. And she can't put her finger on it. She herself doesn't identify as Christian, but she's spiritual.
Yeah.
But she's seen people move from one religion to Christian and from not believing to believing.
Wow.
But she can't put her finger on it.
Have they found themselves in one group in particular, or is it all just across the board?
I would say it's a blend of mainline and evangelical,
Okay.
or I would say evangelical mainline folks, you know.
Yeah.
Well, with that, there's our major, I don't even know what to call them, renewals on college campuses right now.
True.
That remind me of the Jesus movement of years ago, when tons of kids are coming to Jesus and they're dumping into whatever congregation will feed them.
Right.
And so I can't say whether it's mainline or what it is, but those kids are going somewhere.
Oh, yeah. And what I find fascinating is they do not want to go to a rule-bound organization. They want to go where they feel safe first, where they can express and absorb, where they do not feel judged. And it's they're starting to voice themselves. And young men are starting to voice themselves.
Yeah.
When you say rule bound, what do you mean?
Not Presbyterian.
Rule bound. What time do I have to worship? do I,
What does worship look like? How
What-
structured
exactly.
is it? Yeah.
There's also a trend to not joining things. They'll
absolutely,
join a movement or an idea, but they're not gonna join an organization.
So true. My second question is, why do you think 44% of our presbyteries have not started a new worshiping community or church in the last 5 years?
Because it's a lot of work.
It is a lot. Is it a lot of work, Reed?
Don't get started. I'm just gonna sit quietly over here.
It is a lot of work. That is true.
and it's a lot of money.
There's a lot
You
of
know,
money.
if you go back to the first question for just a second.
Yeah,
It feeds
yeah,
into this. You know, in our own presbytery, we've seen a lot of churches close. And they've, and if I got this wrong, correct me. But for the most part, they're closing because it's the generation who's been there for 30, 40
Right.
years, and there's no new generation coming up.
That's
in.
right.
And that may go to that chart before. We're declining because the old guard is passing away, whereas the young guard is just going a different direction. They're not joining. But you know, we've seen that with churches. George, you mentioned the church had one surviving member, you know, and we let that church stay alive. We let it stay alive as long as we could. But that's also that generation that's left behind. I think it's harder for them to make that change to bring in that new generation, because that's, you know, you can bring in some more 70s and 80-year-olds. That's not gonna last long.
Right. Right.
But you really gotta, you know, I've heard daughters mentioned here. I got 2 daughters and they both grew up at First Pres, and they loved all the activities. They went away to college and they disconnected, and it's hard to get them back together. But I absolutely believe they're probably in the category they'd call nuns, but they've got a faith that they're working through, they're living through. But we're also dealing with that younger generation where our kids, their kids, they're over engaged with so many activities, and they're scheduling them on Sundays now.
That's right.
Yeah.
And so they're making a decision to do that. And you know, I don't know how you reconcile that or resolve that, but
I remember when my wife and I first moved here, and for lack of a better place to go, we ended up in a Lutheran church, ELCA over in Hildebrand for a while. And I'll never forget my first impressions walking in this old building, there's old people. And I thought to myself, what young person in their right mind, first of all, would walk toward that old building with its archaic doors closed down? It's difficult stairs to climb, at least for me anyway, and go in there and expect to feel comfortable doing old liturgy hymns that make absolutely no sense. It's no wonder we're shrinking. I mean, it's common sense to look at it sociologically and say, why don't the Lutherans wake up? Why don't the Presbyterians wake up, and the Methodists, the so-called mainliners?
Yeah.
It's obvious what's going on. It's a generational shift, and we're just gonna have to live and die through it. And then hope whatever comes down the road takes whatever form it takes. I think we spend so much time beating ourselves over what we cannot change, which is our old age and our old church. We can't.
But we can. And Marcia and I made a conscious decision at Cheryl's Ford. And we're fortunate because we were that old church. We were exactly the church that you just described. And to walk through our narthex, to come into our church, you had to walk through this group of old men who stood there with bulletins over to the side talking about wheat prices and everything else. And if a new person came in, they sort of handed them a bulletin, didn't talk to them about church or anything, and that person didn't come back.
And if you're a woman, you should have surely did.
Mm.
Because it was so uncomfortable to walk through
Yeah.
and stand out there.
Like a gaunt.
Especially if you were alone, yeah.
So what I think a lot of these topics have in common is talking about culture. And we look at the trend, we talk about the culture of our nation and people at large, but the culture of the church. And one of the reasons I'm not surprised to see that in our Presbyterian or denomination, a decline in churches is, I think, built into the culture, particularly in the mainline churches, is a respect for tradition and holding on to these things that we figured out that work well, without the balance to say we also need to be adaptive leaders and try new things and try to expand who is invited, who's welcome, and how we go to them. If they won't come on Sunday because they have a soccer tournament, well, maybe it's not maybe it's not their fault that they don't decide to come on Sunday, but it's our fault to not meet them where they are.
Yeah.
On that note, I'm going to keep us going.
Sorry.
Because no, that's perfect transition into the third question that I asked. So the third question I asked is, who is in charge of new church development within your presbytery? I was really curious, who is the ones that are thinking about these things? And what I learned was 44% had a committee in charge. We're good Presbyterians, right? We create a committee to do these sorts of things. But what surprised me was that blue line, it's 32% had no one.
Yeah.
No one in charge of new church development. Now, I almost didn't even put that as an option because I thought, oh, surely every presbytery is going to have someone. But my wife said, no, put that as a question. And a third of our presbyteries don't have anyone, any committee, any group that is thinking about new church development. 11% of presbyteries said a combination between an individual church and a committee of the presbytery. 12% chose other, and their responses range from a moderator appointed task force to an AC for development and vitality. One presbytery leader said, well, it would fall under a council, but we're not currently doing any new church development. So let me say one thing really clearly. I love the work of 1001 New Worship Communities. That's our denominational level church planting kind of arm. I think we need a really strong denominational arm for church planting. However, when I see the work of starting new worshiping communities left to the presbyteries, it seems like a third of our presbyteries are not even trying. They're saying we're just not doing that work. And whether it's because they don't know how, or whether they don't have the vision or the time, but roughly 55 of our 166 presbyteries are not engaged in this work right now. It made me wonder what could change that. And we'll probably get to that in a little bit, but what could change those presbyteries who are not at all interested in this from really engaging, at least in some way? My fourth question.
And before you leave that,
Sure.
if you wouldn't mind going back, the thing that really surprised me is the individual church thing is really tiny. Back in the day, larger churches with money and pastors of vision often were the planters of other congregations. And so that is saying either we've lost the presence of the larger or the heart to do it, one of the two or both.
Yeah.
Is that also partly we're in it for our own survival?
That's right.
We're
I know of many larger churches back in the day that planted churches. I mean, that were not connected with them. They became presbytery churches. But it meant they had the money and the drive and the push, you might say.
In many ways, that's how Artisan started. It was this church that said, no, we should start something, but we had to partner with the presbytery because we didn't have the finances to create a whole new church. So it became a partnership model. But you're right, the individual church was the one speaking up. All right, the fourth question, how does your presbytery help to fund a new worshiping community or a new church plant? And they could choose more than one option. So what I learned from this is that 58% utilize grant funding from 1001 new worshiping communities, which is a good resource. It's not a lot of money, but it's a good resource to get started. 48% of presbyteries fund new worshiping communities from the proceeds of a sale of property.
Right.
So a closed church, that sort of thing. We saw how many churches are closing. So when those close, about half of our presbyteries use those funds to start new churches. 38% fund through an investment or endowment account. 24%, so about a quarter, fund through their operating budget. I liked that. I was like, okay, straight from your budget. That's great. 23% rely on donations from individuals. 12% said other, and 10% said, oh, we don't do this. We don't help with funding at all. That's up to the churches. But I was especially interested in that 48%. With so many churches closing, the question of what to do with property of a closed church becomes paramount. So 48% fund new church development from the proceeds of property, which unfortunately means that 52%, the majority of our presbyteries, do not. They don't use the sale of church property to support the creation of new worshiping communities. It made me wonder, okay, so if the net proceeds of a church that's closing is not going to start something new, where are those funds going? My assumption, and this is not research, just my assuming here, is that much of these funds just are utilized to support the ongoing needs of that presbytery, to maintain the status quo. Because if churches are closing, that means that less funding is going into a presbytery, and so they will often probably use those funds where they can get them to maintain what they're doing on a presbytery level. And yet, closed churches may actually be the PCUSA's biggest asset when it comes to new church development. I mean, what if each presbytery used the proceeds of churches that were closing strictly to invest in starting something new? Well, go on a journey with me just for a second. Okay, so again, looking at the big research for a minute. According to the denomination's reported statistics, 406 churches closed in the last 4 years. So imagine that each one of those churches, imagine whatever property you want, but imagine it was sold for somewhere around $400,000. Now, that's complete conjecture, just made up that number. But I mean, some of our churches would be sold for more than that. Some more rural churches might be sold for less than that. So just throw a number out there. That would be 162 million over the course of 4 years that presbyteries could use to fund new initiatives. So that would mean that over 162 million could potentially be available over a 4-year period. That'd be roughly $1 million per presbytery if divided evenly. Now, that's just the past 4 years. I expect in the next 4 years, based on denominational trends, this similar amount of churches will probably close. So presbyteries will have to choose how to use these funds faithfully. I mean, imagine the possibilities. If 1 million was dedicated and committed over 4 years to new church development in every presbytery in our denomination, how would this change the trajectory of all the graphs that we've been seeing and all the decline that we've been seeing? I think the funds are available. I think that's the good news. The funds are available. The choice of how to designate those funds is being made by presbyteries across the USA. Now, the next thing I want to get into a little bit are the 3 challenges that came up consistently in my interviews and talks with general presbyters. Because it wasn't just, fill in the blank, click these buttons, tell me, some info. I also asked for feedback. I asked for fill in the blanks. I called them and said, tell me more about this. And what I learned was that there were really 3 main challenges for presbyteries in not starting something new. The first one is resistance from established churches. That surprised me. Maybe it doesn't surprise you, but that surprised me. I was like, really? I, as a pastor, see these statistics and I say, oh, we need more. We need more churches. What are we doing to create more churches? So I was surprised at the resistance. But as one general presbyter said, struggling churches don't want to share resources. So over and over again, what I heard from people was the crisis status of established churches. Many presbyteries are full right now with smaller, dwindling churches. These churches are just struggling to survive. They're in that state of crisis. So for them to plant something new somewhere in their area may feel like competition. Some may wonder, why is the presbytery investing in something else, a new worshiping community, versus something already established? That's us, because we're struggling. That really illustrates that kind of NIMBY principle, right? Like, not in my backyard. Like, go plant it somewhere else. Don't plant it near us. So there's fear that if a new church is started too close to an existing church, then even if that population can sustain multiple churches, and even if they're reaching out to a different demographic, the existing church may still see that as competition. And general presbyteries were saying, and I don't want to get involved in that. So I'm just going to focus on the existing church and not really have that conversation. Now, with every challenge, I'm going to also offer an opportunity, because I really think there are opportunities in this as well. And the opportunity is for presbyteries to overcome the crisis status of declining churches and really commit to a long-term vision for their presbytery. What or who, maybe is a better question, who does your presbytery need to reach in the next 10 years? That needs to be the vision, not who are we currently reaching, but who do we need to be reaching? How are the cities and towns in your presbytery, how are they changing? What kind of churches do they require today? Not 50 years ago, but what kind of churches do they need today? We're talking a lot about that younger generation. Where do we find them in our presbytery? What sort of churches do they need? What sort of churches are already meeting the moment and are thriving within a presbytery? So much of the general presbytery's work is focused on declining churches, but can they spend an equal amount of time helping to ignite the churches that are already meeting the moment? How can the presbytery invest in churches that are showing real growth here and opportunity? So that was challenge number one. And I think it's not an either or. It's not established churches or new churches. It has to be a both and, where you're investing in the churches you have now and really with a long-term vision focused on churches that are not yet in existence. Challenge number two that they brought up was the changing demographics in a declining area. So one general presbytery, I think I have this here, yes, said this is a very rural, very economically depressed area. Our churches are small and failing at a quick rate. That's anonymous, but I'll tell you that was in the Iowa region. And I heard that a lot in the Midwest, where they said the demographics have changed and our churches have struggled to respond to those changing demographics. It makes me wonder, does this sound familiar to us in conversations we've had with people from other parts of the world and other presbyteries? And how does geography both limit and provide opportunities for new church planting and church growth? So I decided to take my research and divide it up into regions. I thought that would be very interesting to say, okay, if demographics are changing, where are we seeing success or not, or maybe rates of additional decline in the regions across the world or across, our country? So I looked in my data at the regional data. You've got the West region, which is on the far left there. You've got the Southwest with the yellow. You've got the Midwest with the green. You've got the Southeast region with that kind of orangish. So that would be us. You can see North Carolina there. And you've got the Northeast region as well with the blue. So I looked at each of those to really try to learn what was happening in each region. So here's what I learned. Let's start with the Northeast. So this is the blue. 29 presbyteries reported in my data, and they produced 40 new worshiping communities, and they closed 82 churches over the past 5 years. So in the Northeast, they're closing churches at twice the rate, roughly, as starting new ones. Let's go to the Southeast. So that's that light orange. I had 38 presbyteries report, 50 new worshiping communities were produced, and 115 churches were closed in the past 5 years. So that is even more than I think in the Northeast.
Were there any presbyteries that didn't report in the Southeast?
I'm sure there were. So I had 133 presbyteries respond. So across the nation, there were probably 30 presbyteries that did not respond.
I just didn't know if there was like a geographic cluster that didn't respond.
No, it was pretty evenly divided. Yeah, but I could look specifically at that data.
Well, another question
yeah.
I have is, just because it's a new worshiping community doesn't mean it's going to be a congregation. A lot of those are like what we used to call coffee house ministries. I mean, they're fun, but they don't produce a session and a pastor and all the others.
It is such a good thought. And it made me wonder, because what we're not saying is 50 churches produced.
Right, exactly.
We're saying 50 new worshiping communities. And I don't have the answer of how many new worshiping communities end up chartering and becoming a congregation. I would guess it's in the 10 to 20%. I don't know for sure, but I think it's low. I think it's low. In the Midwest, 28 presbyteries reported, and they produced 25 new worshiping communities and 89 closed churches over the past 5 years. So they are producing less than one new worshiping community for each presbytery that they have. Now, when I looked at this in the more granular data, most of that success is happening around big cities. So the Chicago Presbytery is showing a lot of success. It's the bigger cities. The rural areas are really, really struggling in the Midwest. The Southwest was a smaller region, so they had just 11 presbyteries report. They produced 8 new worshiping communities, and they closed 20 churches in the past 5 years. And then maybe most surprising was the West. 21 presbyteries reported. They produced 41 new worshiping communities and closed 28 churches. So wait, they're the ones that actually showed a little bit of growth. I thought that was fairly fascinating.
It is because the West, as many of us realize, has lower church attendance. And being a native of Oregon, Oregon, Washington, California have been the first, second, and third lowest church attendance statistics for a century. It's you know what I'm talking about. Yeah, so it's fascinating to see this statistic.
So that was my theory as well, that kind of the secularization of America kind of started first out West. I mean, I know that growing up in Seattle. And so I think churches have had to figure out how to be creative for longer than maybe us in the Southeast. For us, that secularization has happened much more gradually, in a slower way, but the West have been the front lines of that. And so they've had to be creative in how they reach people. And I think you see that they've really embraced the new worshiping community kind of movement.
Yeah, because Southeast, you think Bible Belt.
You think Bible Belt.
And so, hey, we just, we got it going.
Yep. And you think we have established churches. And so you're focused more, I think, on those than on starting something new.
Probably the fastest growing region population-wise, percentage-wise, than the rest of the country.
Yeah.
Everybody's coming to North Carolina.
Yes, they are.
All guys
coming to Denver and Cheryl's Forge. So here are some of my observations on the regional data. As we just said, the West has started more NWCs than they've closed churches over the last 5 years. What does the West know that the rest of the country needs to discover? Now that's a whole nother, I don't have answers. That's a different research project, but it piqued my interest. It really piqued my interest of, could we interview specifically leaders from those presbyteries to figure out what are they doing and what can the rest of us learn? I also observed that the Midwest appeared to have missed the boat on creating new worshiping communities. They've only created 25 out of 28 presbyteries. That's less than 1 per presbytery. but there's an opportunity. And I think the opportunity is for every presbytery to be contextual. That's the reason that it used to be that our denomination planted churches. It got moved to the presbytery. And I think one of the reasons was they recognized church planting has to be contextual. It has to be your city. You know your city best. You know what type of church would thrive. And so we have the opportunity once again to say, okay, our demographics have changed. So what do we need today? How do we create a church that meets our needs today, leaning into the unique geography we have, the unique culture, the unique heritage of our specific area? So really, what I think is needed is for each presbytery to break out a maintenance mode. And here's what I mean by that. We had one presbyter said, this presbytery has really been in maintenance mode for a long time. I can't imagine the last time this presbytery planted a church. And then he paused for a couple seconds and he just said decades. Does this sound familiar? I think it's time to ignite the imagination of a presbytery, which is where I want to head next, because I think the people in this room and the people on Zoom will hopefully be the ambassadors to the rest of our presbytery of what is possible. And hopefully we can spark new ideas in the rest of the time we have here that meet the needs and meet the moment of our presbytery in particular. So for the rest of our time, I want to talk specifically about the Presbytery of Western North Carolina. As Melvin mentioned earlier, we've closed churches, and each church, I think it's hard to realize, okay, that church no longer exists. We've closed 9 churches here. Yeah, please.
Does that include churches dismissed or just churches that have closed?
Well, I'm going to show you the list.
Okay.
My understanding is closed. And you're right. I don't think it includes dismissed, which may add to that total a little bit. But it starts with Lincolnton in 2020. So this is just last 5 years, which was really the impetus of starting then Artisan in that Lincolnton community. We had Conley Memorial, John Knox, West Asheville, Lynchfield, Oak Forest, Korean Church of Asheville, and Saluda. So all of them 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Oh, and Bessemer City. So 9 churches in the last 5 years, and each church had a story. Each church eventually, or at one point, had a group of people coming together saying, we're going to start this. But over time, something happened. And something happened where they were not growing any longer, and they were forced to close. We, as a presbytery, have opened 2 new worshiping communities in the last 5 years. So Artisan Church, 2021, and House of Mercy, just this last year. So our ratio, we currently have 88 churches in our presbytery. So we have a 9-2. So we've closed 9 churches and we've opened 2 new worshiping communities. Obviously, I would love to see that number be flipped. Someday it may be, but this is the state of our reality right now. Let's look a little bit more into that data. What about membership in our presbytery? We looked at the membership changes of the denomination. How has that affected our presbytery in Western North Carolina? Well, I just looked at the last 10 years. So in 2014, we had a total membership of about 16,000 people who belonged to one of those 88 churches and were a member of that church. In 2024, total membership was about 12,500. So I'll do the math for you pretty quick. It's a net loss of about 35, almost 3,600 people, members, over the course of 10 years. So that would be 23%. So our presbytery has contracted, just membership-wise, by about a quarter in the last 10 years.
So if you combine the 2 things, building count went down 9%. Membership went down 23%. So the membership declines at a 2.5 times faster rate and the building declined.
One was 5 years, one was 10.
So that is the difference. So the 9 churches that closed were just in the last 5 years.
Okay,
These are the last 10 years.
okay.
And these numbers do include churches that have transferred to other denominations
Mhm,
in the last 10 years.
mhm. Yes. Now, I think,
Still a big number.
right.
Yeah.
I think membership is interesting. Membership is not the only way to learn a story of a presbytery, because I mean, as Unity knows, we just redid our roles, right? We try to keep updated roles of membership. So sometimes that can look like you've dropped some when you're just saying, oh, these 100 people moved, so they're no longer on our roles. So I think worship attendance is more helpful, which we'll get to in a second. But if these trends were to continue at the same rate, we'd only have about 9,000 members in the next 10 years. So that's what we want to avoid. We want to see this going up instead of down. But that is where we have been headed. So let's, and if the numbers continued of closing 9 churches every 5 years, we'd close 18 in the next 10 years. And that would leave us with 70 churches. So presenting all this to say, how do we turn this around? If this is the direction we're headed, how do we change the direction? But let's look for a second at worship attendance, because I think that's probably a better metric in a lot of ways. I mean, membership is changing. Younger people are joining less. They're not wanting to say, yes, I'm going to be a member of that church, but they may come. They may come. They may act in all intents and purposes as a member. So let's look at worship attendance a little bit, because that tells a different story. So 26 churches in our presbytery have grown their average worship attendance in the last, this is 5 years. So in the last 5 years, so about 30% of our presbytery's churches have shown growth in average worship attendance over the course of 5 years. 62 churches have decreased in average worship attendance. That was a little startling to me. So 70% of our churches in the last 5 years have shown less people coming to worship than in the 5 years prior. 39 of our churches had an average worship attendance of 30 people or less in 2024. So I think we're aware we do have a lot of small churches in our presbytery, but that kind of puts it front and center for me, where that's almost half. Almost 44% of our presbytery has 30 people or less coming on a Sunday morning and coming on average on Sunday morning. I think those are danger zone churches. Now, some small churches are great and they are self-sustaining and they'll be fine. I think a lot have gotten there over decades of decline and they will not be fine. That's a danger zone church. And so part of what I want to discuss in a little bit is what can we do? What can we do to revitalize those churches in our very presbytery? So let's have a little moment of discussion and then I'll get to some more statistics. What has surprised you about these statistics from our particular presbytery?
How do they compare to the rest of the country?
Mm.
You know, COVID is a defining moment in that period.
True.
And I would like to see year to year, 2 years, COVID, pre-COVID, post-COVID, how many are doing like we are and running a much bigger AV attendance, and supplementing that way than butts in seats.
Yeah.
That's a tough thing to get your arms around that.
COVID is a defining moment. And you're right, it skews the data a little bit because what do we consider church attendance now? Is it just people coming in person? Is it people streaming? Is it people choosing to give? Like what are our markers?
Yeah.
I think every church is having to answer that question.
And there is no uniform definition of that.
No, there's not.
I mean, you can't get the denomination to say what this counts as worship attendance. They leave it to each church.
Which means,
Mm.
which means so you can't compare apples anymore.
Mm.
If you want to.
Well, it's very hard to count online attendance because that's devices when you're counting through, whatever you're
Yeah.
getting off of
Yeah.
YouTube. You don't know if there are 2 people or 1 or 4. They're not necessarily people.
That's right. That's right.
Yeah, you actually could have an aging congregation where most of them are at home. And they're counted as here, and there's only 10 people in the sanctuary. That's actually, I've seen that happen.
Yeah.
What do you do about that?
Now, I was surprised by the 30% that are growing. That's a sign of hope because that number could easily have been much smaller. That's actually huge.
I think that's.
I'm assuming the Presbyterian knows which 30 we're talking about.
Oh, it must.
Does that tell you anything as it relates to like the formation of neighborhoods, if you will?
Yeah. So that's a great question.
Yeah.
Yeah, which we'll get to actually in a little bit of some of the specific churches, but not all of them. That would be a really interesting thing to research.
Yeah, I was gonna say similarly, I think it's really key. What's happening in those churches that are growing attendance? But there's a story that I throw out there that a number of you have probably heard, whereas back in World War II, all the planes were coming back, getting shot up. And they were trying to figure out, they kept on reinforcing where the bullet holes were. They finally got somebody to consult on this situation. And the guy said, stop reinforcing where the bullet holes are. Reinforce where the bullet holes are not, because those are the planes that aren't coming back. So are we looking at the right stuff? Maybe we shouldn't look so much at where we're seeing damage, but look at other places. I can't figure out how to make that analogy work here. But I also think that if you look at a lot of our smaller churches, just like we're seeing churches close, we're probably seeing hospitals close and shopping centers close and schools closing. And that's something we have to figure out how to respond to, and it will probably call for a different response than other communities.
Yeah.
I was struck by the amount of money that could be accrued from the closing churches, and thought came to me, who needs the churches? I mean, the Baptists run out of storefronts. They're not slowing down, the evangelical community churches, we're slowing down, the Lutherans are slowing down. All these buildings are worthless in our society. And the point of the internet takes you right back to that same point. You don't need a building to have a church.
That's right.
That's a scary thought. That's the way the church started, folks.
That is true.
The Roman
That is true.
Empire, you didn't have a church. It was all word of mouth. You didn't even have a Bible. It was all word of mouth. That may be where we're heading. And it's hard for us to accept that. Because we have traditions, and we think we have the right theology, and why don't the kids understand it or take it in? Why would they rather follow this other mushy stuff? That's the nature of the beast. So I agree. I think if you spend a lot of time looking at the nuns and try to understand what attracts them, if they're attracted to it, because we all have stories. I have 2 daughters, they're no longer Presbyterians. One didn't like the music, the other one couldn't understand half the stuff the preacher was talking about. So we're out of touch. We're just a bunch of old folks that are out of touch trying to figure out, what do we save that's so important to us? And I feel strongly about that. I'm Reformed and Presbyterian through and through. I was born in Wales. Just to give you an example of how far back I go, but I can't convince my 40-year-old daughters that they're into some stuff that really isn't going to stretch them. They're happy where they are. Leave them alone.
Can I say something?
Yes, please.
Well, I'm sitting here thinking, okay, so if we have 30 are growing, it makes sense to me to study what are those churches doing and look at that model and try to go from there. What is working? What is being successful? I also look at smaller churches have so much for one person, a minister, to minister to so many people, and it's hard to be the master of everything and do everything well. So my question would be, how can we as a presbytery support the ministers, fill in the blanks behind them? Because I think you can't ask one person to be all things and do everything well. As a member of First Presbyterian Church Asheville with 3 ministers and then a halftime minister and then other support staff, it's easy to be a vibrant church because you've got so many people working together to nurture the different aspects of the church. And for one minister who's probably working part-time even at that, to be able to do that and help a congregation thrive, I think is asking for the impossible. So
Well
right.
said. Thank you.
So we've done a lot. Marcia and I have been there 14 years. When we went there, it was a dying church. It was exactly the church you see described up there. There were 70 on the roll. There were 30 that came in attendance. When we purged the roll, there were 59. And today our numbers are way different, and we're more than twice the size that we were, and we're vibrant, and we're exciting, and we're thriving, and all those other type of things. And we're in a really good environment, but we were brutally honest with ourselves. And we recognized that we were not an inviting church. Doesn't mean our people weren't nice. The people were great. But we were not an inviting church. We were old. We looked old. We had a dirt parking lot. And we'd have visitors that would come and they'd stay a week or 2 weeks and you'd never see them again. And we had to find, and that's the narthex story that I told you about. But we've invested more than $400,000 in converting our church and in having having a media structure that makes sense, having social media structure that communicates, and we're not great there. We need to get much better, but we are at least adequate, and we can speak well. We stayed with the word, and we focused on the word. And we always focused on the word. But it doesn't do any good to focus on the word if people don't come into your church. So you have got to become inviting. You have to take the barriers down, and you have to understand the barriers.
Yeah.
And sometimes there are barriers that we don't want to admit. Being Presbyterian may be a barrier.
But I think that's the one thing we haven't been very successful at, is bringing in young people that will continue it. We're getting plenty of even 50 and 60 years old sometimes, but not the young people that.
And that's the next step.
Yeah.
But
we gotta keep going.
But the Baptists are brilliant at that.
We're
And-
jealous.
They'll drop. We have just up the street at the elementary school, they'll drop a church plant in there, and they have the whole thing set up and surrounded for the Sunday school and all the events and pieces like that. But I think the key becomes, you really have to be willing to be honest, and you have to be careful what you're gonna hold on to. Because if you're gonna work hard to hold on to something, you have to be able to justify what that is. Hold on to the word of God. Without doubt. Jesus never said build a church. You can go through all the scriptures. He says create. But he didn't say put bricks and mortar. Paul was all home churches. Peter was all home churches. And they did a phenomenal job with that. But then what does your community need? Our community has food insecurity, so do something that makes you important to your community. And then the word gets out, and then people start coming and saying, that church has been there a long time.
Yeah.
But now they're doing something,
Mm.
and money's an issue. We were a week-to-week church. We were like lots of other churches. We had no reserves. We got blessed, and Holy Spirit, God put it together where we got a $297,000 gift from a parishioner who passed away. But we handled that gift well. And we invested it properly into the church and then put a base underneath. But our financial base has never eroded, but we've invested the $400,000 that I said that we've invested over this 10 years into the church. And we constantly are working on being a safe environment and a proper place. I think two things have to happen. Which churches, someone in the presbytery level, and I look at George and Beverly and they work their tails off at this, has to make decisions, and there's a hard decisions, brutal decisions. Does this church have life or not? And if it does, we have money in the presbytery. That money needs to be invested. It doesn't do us any good holding on to it in the presbytery. One of my frustrations is how much money PCUSA has. I read their financial report at the end of the year, every year, and it gets very frustrating to me.
That's actually a good segue for these last slides. You're good at that, Russ. Segueing us on. In the time we have left, these are the last slides, and the comments were also made. Okay, there's 30% that are growing. What can we learn from them? And I'm on the same wavelength. So of the bright spots, we need to learn from the churches that have grown in worship attendance in our presbytery over the past 5 years, which includes First Hickory. Hey, First Hickory.
They had another dozen members, I believe, last week.
It's
By the drove.
It's a dramatic increase. And this is just worship attendance. In 5 years, it's dramatic. And now some of that could be streaming. Again, we need to know, okay, what numbers are we comparing? But it is a really vibrant church. Black Mountain, we heard of Black Mountain already. They're doing good things in that part of our presbytery.
Well, and let me just add for Black Mountain, Beverly and I have been there almost 7 years, and the first year we were there, the involvement of children and youth, or the presence of children and youth, it had cycled.
Sure.
And in the last 5 years, because of staffing decisions and program decisions, it feels like a zoo sometimes on Sunday morning, because kids of all ages running around, parents around,
Parents doing
feeling
things
well
together, learning from
Yes.
each other, special. I
Mm.
mean, we have 3 services and back to back, small, with kids, with this.
Yeah.
So that increase is
That's
at
why.
the tail end of a dip.
Yes, that's so helpful to see. So yeah, what can we learn from Black Mountain? Unity's been doing really well
Yeah.
for the last 5 years. Cheryl's Ford, that's been a huge success story in our presbytery. Southminster in Gastonia has really shown growth as well. And so what can we learn from them? And it made me wonder, do we conduct a survey? Do we have a panel discussion of some of these pastors? What do we do to learn from the churches that have shown some growth already? I really think there are multiple routes to church growth. One are targeted grants. So as Russ mentioned, as presbytery, we have the funds. And how do we invest in our churches? We've done these outreach grants this last year where it's $5,000 per church. If you have an initiative to reach outside your walls, we will fund that for you. And we've shown some real success in the churches and the projects that they are coming up with. One church, I think it's Lowell in Lowell, I guess. They came up with the idea of sponsoring a girls softball team because they don't have that younger demographic. But if they can sponsor that team and be their biggest cheerleaders, they thought that's a way to get outside of our walls. There's been such good initiatives coming from our churches with these grants. So targeted grants may be a way to growth. Obviously, additional new worshiping communities and making that a presbytery-wide emphasis. So right now, I think that only happens if a church like Unity steps up and says, we want to do this. Or in the case of House of Mercy, if someone gives us at the presbytery call to say this pastor, I mean, how it happened was someone called me and said, you need to talk with this pastor. He needs to be Presbyterian. And it really was the case where he was being drawn more to the PCUSA and brought his church with him. It's those sort of organic conversations, but what's happening as a presbytery-wide emphasis, I don't see as much of that. It could be an outside consultant. So there's in the West, with a lot of new worshiping communities, a group called Cyclical that is an outside consultant that came from the PCUSA that's doing a lot of good work. Is that something that our presbytery looks into? I actually have a call with him next week. I'll let you know what I learned. But is that something that we look into to investing in for our presbytery? Simultaneous close and starts. There are some times where the writing's on the wall and you see that this small church is going to close. Having conversations with them gracefully to say, can we start something new as you are nearing the end, so that as you close, you're handing over the reins to a new community in your midst that will still be Presbyterian, but without all the tradition that maybe has caused some of that decline. It has to be a church that's willing. You know, some churches say, I just want to be the last one out to turn out the lights.
We've got one of those going right now.
And so it has to be the right church that has a vision for the future church. But who in our presbytery is having those conversations? How do we know of these churches? This could be a place of emphasis. And then finally, mergers. So small churches absolutely can be merging together if they're willing, because one church usually has to give up property, or sometimes both churches. But if you don't have a critical mass at either place, that can help you get that critical mass so that when a visitor comes in on a Sunday, they feel like there's enough people, enough energy, and a huge success story. I think it's been Fairview and United in our very presbytery.
Where was Fairview?
Lenore. And then my last slide to help us think of possibilities. Our presbytery can fund these sorts of initiatives. And so I don't want us to be limited in our imagination. So really quickly, our presbytery has cash, so just on hand, of over $1 million, just in our checking account. I'm sure no church can say that in our presbytery.
Don't say that loud because it makes us really shut up.
But our presbytery has the resources. In the money market, they've got 257,000, CDs, 212. Then we have our investment accounts, as Russ was alluding to. We've got over 5 million in our investment accounts. Building Hope is doing really well with 1.6, almost 1.7 million. Malawi has funds directly towards them. We've got receivables from sales tax, notes receivable of 1.4. So, I mean, total assets are over $10 million in our presbytery. With that being said, a lot of that is designated for purposes, but a lot of it is not. Almost half of it is completely undesignated and open to the right sort of project. I mean, that is where the funding came for Artisan Church. That is where $30,000 a year is going towards House of Mercy for 3 years to help them as they grow as a new church plant. The resources are there. The imagination has to match that. And so that's where we end today. Is what if money was no limitation? What initiative could you think of that would either assist our current 88 churches or create something new in our presbytery? You have 7 minutes to come up with all your ideas, and I'm taking notes. But what do you guys think? If you were to ignite your imagination, what could we do in this presbytery?
I grew up Methodist and we had churches at that time on charges, where they shared pastors, they shared resources. Thinking 50 years ago, there might be 2, there might be 3 or 4. But some of these small churches, it sounds like if they formed cohorts of some sort that could share, youth group, Bible study, things that are, I guess, vital for bringing in people, but also resource heavy. It seems like that would be at least a way to help them turn that corner from decline to.
Reed, can you speak about Link for a second? Because that's exactly kind of what I think Janine was just talking about.
Yeah, so Link is an initiative that Artisan Church in Lincolnton has entered into a partnership with 4 other churches in the downtown Lincolnton area. A Lutheran church, a Methodist church, and 2 Episcopal churches. And the idea is that all of us have small numbers of children and youth, and we have tried to get critical mass by putting our efforts together, putting our youth together, and forming a children and youth program that is meeting once a month right now, and it's going to start meeting twice a month in 2026. But the idea is we share resources and we share communication, and we make a space that's we have a lot in common with our other mainline church neighbors, and so theologically and also mission wise, so and geographically. So we are going to rotate between the churches hosting and share that together. So that's one idea that we've come up with along those lines of kind of sharing our resources to make something viable, so that my 4 kids have a youth program to go to that's not at the big church down the street. Yeah.
And not to put you on the spot, but I think I saw your attendance this past Sunday was like 47-ish.
You are putting me on the spot.
Was it somewhere around there? 47? So 47 people, which is not unusual for you guys, is already then over that 44% of our churches that have 30 or less. It shows that sometimes it's easier to grow when you start something new. It's sometimes hard to have for an existing church to add on too much for probably a number of reasons. Now, there's still challenges that new churches face. Usually people don't give right away. That takes years of commitment. So you got the financial aspects always, but in terms of just the amount of people coming, that's success right there.
I've tried that conversation with the Lutheran Church in Hildebrand. I thought I was gonna be crucified. They wanted nothing to do with closing their dear old church and starting over.
Yeah.
Nothing.
Yeah. It has to be the right
30
vision.
people.
The Anglican Church,
Yeah.
the church.
David, can you hear me?
Yes.
David Richard Boyce. I've been trying to be quiet because I'm sorry I tuned in late to this. A couple things. First, I just want to commend you for your project. Of course, I've known about this project for a little while, and am so glad to see it bearing fruit the way it has, because I think you have helped us see the urgency of this issue in ways that we just continue to ignore, and done it in a regional, contextual way that I think is very illuminating. And I think one thing we've got to do, I too love to think we would approach this positively, rather than as a reaction to the stats that we're seeing. But I tell you, not only do churches not change very rapidly, seminaries sure don't change very rapidly. I think until our institutions look in a more systemic way, that what happens in our presbytery is we have our larger churches who are fairly complacent about this issue because they're doing okay. And they're quite apt to attribute their continued growth to their faithfulness when it may simply be location and the vitality of their communities. And then we have our struggling rural churches who shift into survival, not because they're less faithful, but because they're just in tight places. So I don't know how we get this word out and talk more honestly and comprehensively as a presbytery. That's my concern, is I think we've got a lot of wisdom. We obviously have resources at the presbytery level, but you're trying to ignite a flame underneath this presbytery regarding creative thinking for the future. And I commend you for that. I'm not, it needs to be presbytery-wide discussion, and we've got to get away from anecdotal sort of things where people are attributing their growth to things that simply will not work in a large majority of our congregations. It's going to take more radical and creative action. So thank you for listening, everybody. Yeah.
David, let me interrupt too. Bill Neely, can you hear me?
Yes.
One of the things that I have found in making libraries is if they can define why they exist and find a mission cause to be involved in. And it doesn't matter whether it's 5 people or 500 people. You've got to have a mission cause and a reason for existing.
Thank you, Bill. Yeah, something outside of yourself. That is so
I
good.
could not agree with that more.
Mhm.
That's what changed Cheryl's Ford. When we took over a clothing closet at an elementary school that wasn't even the elementary school closest to us. And we could then start talking about it. The 35, 40 people who were there in church, we could start talking about that we had done that. And it makes all the difference in the world. You start to puff your chest up a little bit and say, we did something.
Yeah, we're doing it together.
Yeah.
Other ideas to ignite our imagination?
Well, I'm aware, since I've kind of been in the biz like you have for a long time, that there's been a lot of research done, not exactly what you've done, but in that sort of methodological field for a lot of years. And so listening to this just triggered a whole lot of memories and readings and experiences for me. The one book that I'm thinking of right now was published 30 years ago by 2 sociologists of religion called Church and Denominational Growth. And their basic thesis was denominations grow when congregations are formed. So this conversation is really in line with this really, and I've read a lot of that, Hadaway and Rusin and McKinney and others, really good research. And I think a lot of that still speaks to what we're talking about here today. I just want to thank you again for doing this and for sharing this with the presbytery.
My pleasure.
Just 3 points that are kind of like questions that I have for sort of like the next steps. One, not in any particular order. The Methodists have done a lot of research on their journey, and one of the things they really came out with, and you know, we always talk about young people, but what they specifically noticed, and it's not a surprise if we think about church work, but that healthy congregations tended to attract and have active engagement of young women in their 20s.
Young women in their
Young
20s?
women in their 20s.
How about
Not to
that?
be specifically gendered about this, but we all know that women do most of the church work.
Yep.
Now my daughter will not go to a church if it doesn't have a woman pastor. So I'll just name that. And so and she got more involved in church after she left home.
Yeah.
You know, so she was not that involved in high school, but as soon as she left home, she looked for a church. And she called me and she said, "Can you help me find a church?" I said, "What's your criteria?" She said, "Woman pastor." And she's did that in New Mexico, and she's now in Washington, DC. And she went with some friends to church hopping for a while and couldn't find anything. And then finally she found one. And I said, "Well, who did you go with?" She's like, "Nobody, I went by myself." And so she's actively both going in person, and if she's feeling slow that day, she'll watch it online. So I think this question of young women and how do we actually create authentic engagement And I think, and then a question that the Duke Endowment is asking, particularly among the Methodist churches, is how do we measure thriving? And it's not necessarily connected to worship attendance. And so I would venture that for the 30 churches that are growing, how are you defining growth? And then maybe ask some sociological kind of deep hanging out questions about like, well, what's happening here that contributes to the growth that we're actually not measuring?
Yeah, right.
Because I think most people that have been in church world long enough know that we're not measuring all the right things. And so we need to be capturing what's working well and ask some questions maybe of the presbytery about why aren't we measuring what's working well? And that may be all I have to say, but I mean, I just think it's interesting because I think a lot of mainline denominations in particular are trying to figure it out, and maybe there should be some research sharing back and forth.
I love that.
Well, and you remind me of some work done that showed churches that grow focus less on getting the new member and more on launching new groups.
Right.
However many groups we've got, what's the next one? And the next one, and the next one. Because you very quickly use up all the members and you begin involving all kinds of subgroups, but it's group, groups of 5 people, 10 people, 4 people, 2 people. But you see churches that are stuck have had the same subgroups forever. And you can't break into a subgroup that's existed forever.
And I think the working question, the endowment particularly is wrestling with regarding Methodists is that they believe, and I think they're right, is that a thriving church is engaged in the community. Period. And what that looks like is deeply contextual to that situation.
This is great conversation. I also want to be aware that I promised you lunch.